Episode 7 of Frozen Planet is called On the Ice, and it's all about the environmental impacts that we're having on the poles. So this episode features quite a lot of David Attenborough. He's the presenter of this episode rather than just the narrator. We open up with him at the North Pole talking about that how by 2020 it's very likely that there will be ice-free summers at the Arctic. And that kind of leads me to the most interesting part of this episode, is that this is a bit of a time capsule in a way. This was also the first time that one of these series had an environmental episode at the end. That was never done before, which is interesting when you compare it to now, where it's basically woven in throughout the narrative. It feels like a bit of a time capsule in a way because it shows you the changing attitudes between then and now with regards to climate change and the melting ice caps. The fact that he says that we'll get ice-free summers by 2020, that never actually happened and it still hasn't happened. But it's interesting to see how our perception has changed on these events. I mean, the first major bit of footage we get is people darting polar bears to check their health. That's fine. It doesn't really have as much to do with the climate change stuff as the rest of the episode does. It's nice to see polar bears one last time in the series because they've been such a staple. So it's good, and again, seeing Attenborough next to a polar bear is cool. Then we start seeing how things at the Arctic are changing, like these big cracks in ice are forming, they're getting wider. There's these Inuit people, they're using GPSs to track these cracks in ice, because there was always cracks in ice, but now more and more are appearing. So that was interesting. Shows you that, well, most of us are pretty insulated from this. We're kind of detached from the whole idea of it. And the people that live there are very much dealing with this and have noticed it in their lifetime. That's interesting. We also briefly highlight oil. The oil and gas industry is perhaps benefiting from this melting ice because obviously a lot more land is available for them to drill on. So there's a big push for people to get control of the Arctic. It's a bit depressing when you look at how kind of glossed over it is in this episode. That was interesting again to show how views had changed. And they do talk about how some animals are kind of benefiting from this. Not all of them are. Obviously the polar bears aren't. The walruses as well, they're crowding on beaches because there isn't any ice for them to crowd on. But they talk about things like bowed whales, how they're maybe doing a little bit better, how orcas are able to travel further north. And that's something that was explored in Frozen Planet 2. So that's interesting as well. There's a lot more animals that are predated by orcas that maybe weren't as at risk as they were before. So that's quite interesting as well. And this episode did a good job of highlighting the albedo effect, how the sun's rays are reflected by the white of the ice, and obviously when the ice is melted, the ocean is darker, so it absorbs heat, hence stimulating further ice melt. That's interesting. I mean, that's something I know about, but this episode does a good job of highlighting it. I think back in 2011, maybe it wasn't as well known. So again, it was probably important for then. And also the glacier melts, how all these little lakes that form in the glaciers are all dropping beneath and causing the ice to rise, and a lot more ice is falling into the ocean, thereby increasing the amount of water in the ocean, which obviously has long-term negative effects for us. That was interesting. The whole Arctic stuff was quite interesting. That's the one that's a bit more depressing, I think. We're all aware of how bad the Arctic is. And then we go to Antarctica. We mainly start off in South Georgia. It was really interesting how Attenborough talks about how when he visited Antarctica, and specifically South Georgia for the first time, you know, these glaciers, and also some early Antarctic explorers that had photos of the glaciers in South Georgia, and comparing them from then to 2011, where they're drastically reduced. Even since Attenborough was last there, it was, you know, they had reduced quite a lot. We don't tend to think of climate change as being as bad in Antarctica, and by here we do highlight that it is a very big problem. We also talk about the animals that are impacted by it. Adelie penguins are struggling because there isn't any ice, so they're having to breed further south. But it also opens up the window to things like gentoo penguins, which prefer comparatively warmer waters. They're on the continent now, whereas before they were restricted to islands further north. I think also them talking about the depth of the ice, where they were blowing up and how it's reducing, is interesting because there's so much ice in Antarctica, and even if one big chunk of that was to split off and enter the ocean, that would have a massive, massive impact. So while we don't think of Antarctica as being as under threat as the Arctic, this episode did a good job of showing you that, in fact, that is not the case. And then we get the diaries, which is all about the people filming the frozen lake that burst in the first episode. It's a bit weird. It's a good sequence, actually, to be fair. It is quite fun. That one old guy that predicted when it would burst and was right pretty much every year apart from 1985 was interesting. It was really weird for me because he looked just like my granddad, which was quite strange. But no, it was fun. I mean, it was very weird, though, because the episode, well, it isn't depressing, it is quite serious, and that diary sequence just felt a little bit too the other way. It was kind of more lighthearted. Actually, more lighthearted than a lot of the other diary sequences have been, to be honest. It was a really weird one to put in this episode, so yeah, I liked it. It was definitely a bit of a weird choice to end the series on. So yeah, this episode is good. For being the first kind of these episodes, it was pretty revolutionary. And also, as I say, it does feel like a time capsule because you really do see the information that we had then, how it's changed from now, how the attitudes have changed since then for now, the fact that we predicted things that obviously didn't happen, or at least haven't happened yet, or even the sort of maybe a kind of more lenient attitude towards things like oil and gas, or talking about how some animals are doing alright, is very different to the way we talk about it today. In that sense, it is quite interesting, as I did actually like this episode more than I probably like a lot of these kind of episodes, more for that kind of time capsule-esque kind of thing it had going for it. So yeah, that was good. Overall, this series is great. I mean, it's a classic series, but at this point, it's up there with the Blue Planets and the Planet Earths. It is really good. I mean, a lot of the footage still holds up today, and it's a pretty comprehensive look at life at the poles. And while the first 5 episodes are definitely more memorable than the last two, it is still a good series. And to be honest with you, there isn't really a weak link in here. I kind of liked every episode. So yeah, what did you think of this episode and the series as a whole? Let me know in the comments below. I'll be doing my top 10 video next week, so look forward to that. Also, as ever, as I've finished the series, let me know what you want me to talk about next. Open to anything. I feel like I'll probably end up doing Frozen Planet 2 next, but let me know if there's something else you'd rather me talk about. Yeah, as ever, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, or don't if you don't want to. I'll see you next week, and goodbye.